Hey guys, what's going on? And in today's video, we've got a Patreon exclusive for you, and we're going to be doing a mix breakdown on a wicked tune by SCNE called Third Wheel, featuring AJ Tracey and D7. Let's get cracking. Okay guys, so here is the project file for SCNE's Third Wheel, featuring AJ Tracey and D7. As you can see, I've mixed it in Logic, and most importantly, before we get started, all of my project files will look like this. Doing a mix breakdown, I'll be doing an injustice, not saying how important it is to organize your files. It makes the whole process from start to finish so much more simple. So as you can see here, I've been sent a rough mix 2-track from SCNE where I can listen to it, get a vibe for the song, where they want to go with the record. We can take a quick listen to that now. This is their rough that they sent me. Like WhatsApp. I don't even do ticks to my top cap, stop that. If you got peas, no, I got that. If you're wasting my time, gotta lock that, block that. Shit got real when I clock that. Man, I got... As you can hear, it's quite heavily sort of like limited, compressed. There's not a lot of dynamics in there, but you can hear sort of like stylistically the choices that they've made for the vocals and things like that, and the instrumentals kind of cutting through. But you know, we're gonna have to make a lot of judgment ourselves on where to take this mix. So I've put that there at the top just so I can keep flicking back and referencing it. And then we have here the beat stems. Now obviously for 95% of the mixes that I do, I will get beat stems for. I always prefer to get beat stems just because it enables me to do so much more with the mix, create dynamic, space, depth, and there's a lot of limitations when you're dealing with like producer mix 2 tracks. And you know, sometimes they'll have limiters on, compress, there's not enough headroom, or you know, without sound horrible, they're a little bit sort of like, they think that their mix is better than it is, if you see what I'm saying. So anyway, put that aside, enough cussing at the producers. But yeah, we get the beat stems here, so you can open this up and you can see all of the beat stems. Because this was a smaller project and there isn't a great amount of stems here, I've kept it all in one folder. I want to keep my project files as simple and as organized as possible, just because it helps the sort of workflow when you're working on these projects. But if it was a bit bigger, I might have separated the drums into a unique folder and then all of the rest of the instruments into another folder. All depends on how big the files are. So you can see here, we've organized it. Now this is another thing that I want to get into just before I start playing the record, and how important it is. You'll probably hear me talk about this a lot throughout these videos. It's very important to organize the files in a way that you understand and that you can work through. Like if everything's sort of all over the place, like my kick's down here, my bass is up there, hi-hat somewhere in the middle, you know, you're going to struggle when you're mixing and you're trying to tweak. You're going to, every time you're going to have to try and find it. But if you have some sort of organization to it, again, it helps the workflow. It helps keep your mind clear and focused on the things that are important in the mix. So I always have my stems organized in a certain way. So I have my kick, all my drums first, so my kick, snare, secondary snare, third snare, percussion, hats, you know, going down sort of in a frequency way, so from low frequency to high frequency in that order, whilst taking into importance. So how often does it get played? How important is that particular instrument to the overall mix, being like kick and snare being obviously one of the most important parts. All depending on the song that you're working on, but for this case it was. Then we go into my 808, and then the main sort of melodies and samples, and then lastly we have these sort of like vocal chops that flutter on the top. So that way, you know, when I look at this, I know exactly where everything is. I can flick through and I can make the adjustments as and when I'm needed to. And as I start through my mix, I'll go down in order, sort of like firstly getting the kick in a good position, then creating an overall vibe, foundation with my drums, mixing my 808 with my kick, getting the blend, and then everything else on top. Underneath that, we have our vocals. Here, same sort of thing, you know, we do the mains first, and then if they have any stabs or ad-libs, they go directly underneath, and we try to like work it through in the order in which they're played. So you can see here, it's like first verse, hook, second verse, and then back to the hook again, just so we're working through like in a particular order, trying to keep everything as organized as possible. Now we'll have a little listen through. This is my mix. We'll just have a little play through, and then I'll start to talk about what I did and certain things.
Say you're gonna ride on me, make it bop back, rock back. Anybody sitting on the fence better hop that. I ain't got time for a wife with a fox like this.
I'm gonna solo the instrumental quickly. Let's focus on that first. So you can hear the kick is taking a lot of dominance over the record. I always find it easy to do that when, if I mix in my kick first, that becomes like the foundational point of the project, if you see what I'm saying. So I've brought up my kick first and I've done very minimal to it. You'll find this as a trend on my drums, because especially if it's like digital kicks, it's not organic sounds, which a lot of these like grime and drill and trap records will use, as you know, it's all like digital 808s and stuff like that. They've already been EQ'd and compressed and resampled like God knows how many times before they come to me. You can sort of see here like the dynamics on the kick is there is none. They're all just flat right at the top. They've been compressed and they've just been pushed as loud as they possibly can be. So what I've done is just try to get a bit of headroom, make sure there's not like any clipping or anything like that. If that's what the artist wants, sometimes they want their kicks to sound a bit distorted. But as you can see here, I've just done a little cut at the bottom end just to get rid of any low end rumble, and then a chunk of at the top end, maybe there was some hiss or noise or something like that coming from the stem itself. So just to remove a bit of that. And then most importantly, I've done these two little bumps here, like, you know, they're probably, it's a dB and a half each, around about that. That's not even a dB. That's more so just to point of reference of where the presence is in the kick, like the main hits of the particular sound. I do a little boost just to like bring them out a little bit, and it gives me a point of reference later on. So then when I pull up my 808, as you can see here, I've then cut those same frequencies that I've boosted out of my 808, allowing the presence of the kick to cut through the mix a lot more, so it's not being totally masked by the 808. I call that the jigsaw technique. So if you've watched any of my previous videos, you might have heard me talk about that, but that's something that I do a lot when it comes to like blending my 808 and my kick together. So you can hear the kick nicely cutting through the 808. And finally on my kick, I've added quite an aggressive parallel compression. Parallel compression, for those of you that don't know, is basically you sort of like duplicate the signal. I'm going to release a video on how I do parallel compression in the same month as this, so it should be available on the site already. If not, it will be available within the next week or so. So you create a parallel signal chain of the same sound. So in this case, it's our kick. So we're sending a portion of the signal to another channel strip, i.e. our bus that we've set up here, that will run alongside it. Now, if you were just to do this and not add anything on it, it's just going to make it louder because it's going to be double the volume. You're just sort of duplicating it. But in this case, we've added a compressor on the top of the new signal chain that we've sent, and as you can see here, we've squashed the living daylights out of it. It's quite a fast attack, fast release, very high ratio, very low threshold. So the moment that the kick sort of cuts through, it's being absolutely battered down like very quick. And what we're doing is essentially creating this really tight, compressed version of the sound that we then mix in and layer underneath, just to give it that extra pump and that extra kick that we want for our sound to cut, for our kick to cut through the mix, but without having to sort of like change or destroy the kick sound itself that the producer's obviously chosen for a reason, that he likes the sound and it's already been compressed and already been EQ'd a lot. So just as sort of backup to help us in the mix situation, not so much to change the kick sound itself, we parallel compress it. So you see this working. If I get a section where the kick's playing, we're getting a lot of like drive 8 dB, 16 dB of compression, just to help it cut through and play it in. So if I could A/B this, if you're not wearing headphones or listening at a studio monitors, you will struggle to hear the difference, but just play it in. That's bypass on, bypass on. You just hear it like get pushed. It's like it's getting a push right to the front of the mix, helping the kick cut through, which is obviously going to help the energy and the pacing of the song, which is important. Now, as we run through the rest of the record, I've done a very similar thing with my snares. We've got a small bit of EQ, just cutting. Again, I'm not trying to change the sound too much. I'm already happy with how all of the instruments in the kick, the drums are sounding, and a very small bit of parallel compression to the same parallel compressor, just to help the snare cut through again and glue everything together. Exact same thing with the other snares. And then with the hats, that's when it starts to change. I won't parallel compress my hats because they're already quite of a high frequency. It's not clashing with anything. It's not going to be clashing with my bass. It's not going to be clashing with my vocals. It's right up there at the top, so it's not going to have that much sort of like to play around with. So we don't need to give it that reinforcement. All I've sort of done is given it a really aggressive low cut just to get rid of any noise, any unnecessary frequencies that don't need to be there, and then boosted it a little bit, overarching boost at the top end just to give it a little bit more sheen and a little bit more like boost on that very high end. So now as we go through the rest of it, it gets kind of interesting here with the 808. So it's an 808 driven song. It's a bassy song. As we spoke about earlier with my EQ, we've done some cuts here and here, not done any fancy EQ like with like a Pultec or anything like that, but you can see where I've done my surgical cuts in those pockets that our kick drum was like most prominent in, just giving those spaces. And then I've boosted a bit of the mids here because if you listen to this 808, it has a bit of grit around that top end, and I wanted just to like enforce that a little bit and bring that out. And then we've gone and added a compressor just to sort of like help drive all of the sounds. It's quite a light compression for an 808 anyway, just sort of like bringing up all those notes. And we've got a really fast attack and a medium release just so you can hit every sound. You know, if we were to slow this right down, you'd lose the feeling of the note transitions. Like it sounds a lot softer, and then we make it aggressive and it puts it, you hear all of those notes and it's like helps cut through and you feel the movement of the bass and as it runs through the different notes it's playing. And then I've had it a very bit subtle. Now I sort of changed my technique here, how I do this, but this mix I did. We have a bit of sausage fat in here, which I'm sort of using as not so much for like volume or anything like that, but just to add a bit more grit and almost like saturation and color to the 808. And I've paralleled it so it's not like directly on the top, destroying the sound totally, but just running like a more aggressive version alongside it. Off, on. So it's just a little kind of vibe happening, and just adding a little touch of color coming through it. And then as we've done that, we move on to the main sample. There's two main samples here. This is because one's a bit more filtered than the other, but they're playing near enough the same line. And for this, I've done some cuts, just getting rid of a bit of the low end so it's not clashing with the bottom of our 808, getting a bit of the high end, probably again because there was a lot of noise at the top there. We've got our EQ. Again, same thing. I've decided to boost the mids here just to like obviously bring out some of the higher mids that I felt like it was lacking, bringing the sound a bit more balanced because it's quite bottom mid heavy. We've got a compressor on here, sort of, again, faster, slower release, just sort of bringing presence to it, not so much trying to like tighten it or control it. It's just bringing more presence to the sound overall. So as it's ducking and diving and going through the motions, it's consistently at the front because it's one of the only things that is bringing any sort of like musicality to the beat. Now here we got a slightly more interesting EQ. I'm running a mid side, which is the most important thing about this. And basically what we're doing here is cutting a portion around the mid center, which is where our vocals are going to sit, around that 800 to 1.5k hertz, which is like where the main vocal is going to sit. I'm cutting that out of the center and then boosting around that just so it's like taking away from the middle and pushing it outwards, so then our vocal can sit in the center and it's not going to clash, because obviously they're taking up very, very similar frequencies. So you can hear that, but A-B, that it kind of like closes in. You hear that narrowing in, off, open it, and it just pushes it all out of it, giving the song quite a lot more width. And as I said, most importantly, giving space for the vocal to sit in, but not so we have to like put the sample right behind it or the vocal right on top of it, allowing them to sort of like sit and work together. Do you know what I mean? Like the sample's almost like surrounding the vocal rather than like on top of it or underneath it. I'm going to release a video on exactly how I do this and in a lot more detail in the next few weeks, so keep an eye out for that on the Patreon. Then I've got an NS1 on here. This is by Waves. I'm driving it quite hard because a lot of these stems, unfortunately, were quite noisy, and I was trying to suppress the noise quite a lot. It's simple, like one knob noise suppressor, getting rid of some of those hisses and crackles and things like that were in the sound itself. And I was just trying to clean it up overall. And then finally, to bring a bit back of the high end that the noise suppressor would have taken away, I've added fresh air just to like bring that sort of like sheen back to the sample. So you just A/B those, hear the noise coming in. Sounds a bit dull, put them on and it just brightens it up, but controls the noise a little bit as well around it. And then for the main next sample, similar thing. Can hear that it's been filtered, so I'm not having to do really any of that noise suppression and stuff like that because it's not happening in the high end there. Done a bit more of a tighter cut, so it's being more concentrated to the low mids. It'll be the same compression on here, working the same way, and I would have mid-sided it as well, yeah, similar thing. But I've moved the bands over slightly to work more in that pocket, so it's not driving, but the mid is still being cut at the same point of the vocals, but I'm spreading it a little bit more over to the low mids, just so it's still getting that width that we're used to hearing from the sample at that point. Finally, we've got our vocal chops. Nothing really crazy exciting here other than, you know, standard EQ, just tidying it up a bit, getting rid of any unwanted frequencies. Another compressor just to bring presence and control, so it's like always driving to the front and we're not having to like, it's not being too dynamic in the way that it's like coming in and out, because I want the song to sound overall driven and forefront and like being pushed. Fresh air, again, I think it's important on things like this. It just makes the vocals sound really airy. I'll A/B it so you can hear it like off, and then on, you can hear it just adds so much sort of like spark and sheen and like expensiveness to the sound, which like the mix was missing without it. It's all about balance, you know, got really good low end, tight, controlled, you know, it's well spread, wide, mid, and then like, you know, shiny, expensive top end. That's sort of like what I'm always going for. And just to add like a little bit of movement to it, so it wasn't always like in the center and again potentially clashing with the vocals, I put a stereo tremolo on it, and I made it move quite drastically. Again, it's like a creative decision. It brings movement to the sound and it will stop it from like being directly over or clashing with the center vocal at any one point. So you hear it moves left and right. Just bringing a bit of like texture and its vibe to it. And with the second and final sound, this is like intro and it comes in on the breakdowns. I've sort of left it, let it do what it needs to do, not really touched it too much. Again, just tidying up with the EQ. Noise suppression, because it was quite noisy. Again, about A/B this, you'll hear it, the noise comes through. You're listening through headphones or studio monitors, you can hear that noise, and then adding the noise suppression takes that noise away. And then finally a little bit of compression just to like bring all the sounds up to the front and keeping everything a little bit consistent. And that happens a fair few. That's pretty much the instrumental. Obviously you've got the beat tag down there, don't really need to talk about that. Now obviously going into the vocals. Now we'll talk about the vocals a little bit, but again, you know, we'll go into more depth on like my vocal chains and stuff like that in overall videos. These videos are more like mixed breakdown, so sort of like what I did and a rough, brief sort of like explanation on why I did it, not so much how. We'll go to the juicy bit that everyone wants to hear, which is the AJ verse. I'm gonna play that.
I got demons I'm fighting, that's why more time, man, I got a runs pack lighting. I don't care about ops, I'm way too rich to be fighting, I can't be frightened.
Now, I will say my vocal chain has changed drastically in the last few months, so it doesn't look like this really anymore. But obviously we got it to a place where everyone was happy, AJ was happy, SCNE were happy, and the record came out.
I got demons I'm fighting, that's why more time, man, I got a runs pack lighting. I don't care about ops, I'm way too...
But in hindsight, I would have probably added like a little bit more body to the vocal.
I can sell Duracells to an iPhone, on Grove.MDMA hit.
So we got first EQ. Now you can see these points here. These are points. This is one of the major things that I've changed in the last few months, where I used to sort of do this at the very beginning. I'd highlight frequencies and I'd move them, and then as I was mixing through, things would come back up and I'd go back up to this EQ and try to sort of like remove them more. These are just like frequencies that were like poking out and annoying me. Like there'd be like a sharp S round here, maybe a sh round here, and like a mic resonant noise here probably. Now I use the Pro Q3, and I will like break it down at wherever it needs to be done. I'll add another Pro Q3 into the chain where I hear it like behind it, rather than trying to do it in front of it, if that makes sense. You can see that I've tested a few plugins out here and removed them and kept them in, kept them out. I do use a channel strip on like all my vocals. I don't use this SSL channel strip anymore. I use the API one that comes with the Universal Audio subscription. Is really good. Here we have a DSR one knob. Again, this is a pretty good DSR. It always seems to like find the sweet spot. I'm never really upset at it, but I'm using more the Pro Fab Filter DSR now. But yeah, you can sort of like see it working. To be fair, he's a very good MC and he knows what he's doing. He knows how to like direct his voice in a way that doesn't come off too SE, so you don't really ever have that many issue with it. Here we've got, this is my main sort of like channel strip. This is where I bring all the color into it. Again, I still do use this, but I use other plugins sometimes now. But we've got a sort of my main input here. This is like gain staging, what it's being run through, and then I've got it running through the SSL EQ, but I've not actually done anything to it. I've got it running through this Neve emulation, and as you can see, all I've done is done a little boost on the top end, just because I love what the Neve top end boost sounds like. It sounds very crisp and I really like it. Now I'll have quite an aggressive compressor running on this, which is like a de-stressor emulation. You can see it running. It's big, it's fastest attack, you know, slower release. Probably could have gone a bit faster, to be fair, brought out some of made it feel a little bit more direct, but that's sort of like where we left it. And here is like a little bit of shimmer, again, a little bit of top end and a little bit of thickness being added to it. I really like what this plugin does and the sound that it brings to the vocal. And then finally we have like a last trimmer, which looks like it's peaking a little bit.
I can sell Duracells to an iPhone, on Grove.MDMA hit souls for the evening and fly home.
Okay, so it might have just been like just a one hit, but most of the time it's averaging at a good point. So yeah, that's sort of like my main channel strip. As I said, I don't use this a lot. You'll get plenty and plenty of videos of like how I'm mixing now and what I'm using now. But I thought, obviously, this being quite a popular record, you guys might want to see how I did it and what I used for it. I use this chorus very lightly. This sort of like helps smoothen out the vocal, I think. It just brings a bit more like control and just smoothness to it. I'm not actually trying to like make it feel like it's got a chorus on it, hence why it's very low, the settings. But it just, yeah, it does feel like it adds like a smoothness to the vocal and a bit more of a control. Past that, just because the chorus does always seem, to me, feels like it takes a little bit of the top end away and the sheen. I've added a little bit of fresh air, just bringing a little bit more presence to it. Being very careful though, because it was already quite high end. After that, we've got a multi-band compressor, and as you can see, I'm just working on that high end there, just trying to control that top end, but still making it feel quite high endy, but just like giving it a little bit more control and balance. And then finally, this will be like a looser compressor. Yeah, slow attack, slow release. I like to put these at the end of my change because, again, it helps smoothen everything out. So I've got this like really direct, fast working compressor that's like catching every word and making everything like really clear and aggressive. And then I'll put a light compressor at the end just to sort of like smooth everything out, and then help it sit back into the mix. I can sell Duracells to an iPhone. On Grove and MDMA hit souls for the evening and fly home. I can sell aircon to a cyclone. I can sell cocaine to Escobar. 6-3 G-Wack ting, I'll bless the car hole next. And then, you know, we have our buses. So with my effects, I'll always bust them. Like very, very, very rarely will you ever see like an actual effect unless I'm trying to do something particular to that sound on the actual channel shape. There'll always be bus. So firstly, we've got our Valhalla. This is my like go-to. Always EQ your reverbs. Again, I tend to not use this actual EQ anymore. I'll actually like put an EQ underneath it and EQ it with like a Pro Q3 just so I know exactly what it's doing. But top and bottom, you don't need the highs a lot of the time and you don't need the lows. It's going to muddy up your mix or it's going to make things sound sharp. So EQ your reverbs. Quite a short decay on this. It's rap. You know, you don't want it to be extended. You really want the aggression. I was just trying to add a little bit of room and space to the vocal. Got a H delay here, which is just running a 1.8. That's my go-to for rap as well, obviously depending on the tempo. And I have quite a short feedback that just helps the vocal give a little bit of bounce and just a very, very faint delay in the pockets. But most of the time, you're not even really going to be able to hear it like coming through. It's not like an obvious delay. And I've filtered both sides. And then finally here, this is a parallel compressor, which I've run now. I wouldn't use this compressor anymore. I'd use something like an 1176 or something like that, or like a Fairchild emulation to parallel compress. But I was trying to keep everything as clean as possible. I didn't want to add any more unnecessary noise because, as I said, it was quite a noisy project file to start with. So like a digital kind of compressor, so that obviously like help with that fight that I'm fighting. Now we've got a really fast ratio parallel compression at this point. If you don't know, you can check out one of my other videos that I've got on it, and it's basically I'm just creating a really squashed, tight, very fast compressed version of the sound which I'm running in parallel with it, and this will help AJ and his like faster tones just ride on top of the instrumental and just be clear the whole way. It's a technique that I picked up watching a video from Mixed by Ali talking about how he does some of Kendrick's rap vocals when he's like going really in and complex, and you need to be able to hit every single word. So it's just running in the background. You can see it's not very loud, but it just keeps his presence right at the top. And I mean, that is pretty much the mix. Obviously, it was quite a overall broad detailed version. Any like particular questions you have about the mix, please leave them in the comments or feel free to message me directly about them, and you might see your questions answered in a future video, or if you might get a voice note from me explaining how I did it. I hope you enjoyed it, and you know, good luck mixing, happy mixing, and I will catch you in the next one. Cheers guys.